Thank you, Madam Principal Ms. McLean, for the introduction. We met over the internet for a few, I would say maybe 2 years during the pandemic, people searching for information, and I've had a wonderful relationship as it relates to your principal. So I must say thanks for supporting the work, for providing information too that I look into from time to time. It's about collaboration. So I want to start off by using technology to start off. I hope it plays. All right, so let's get ready.
Hello, my name is Janet. I am Rohan's virtual co-presenter. We are delighted to join you in Barbados this afternoon. Rohan deems the Caribbean as his favorite place, having worked and lived there. Let me say congratulations on becoming a republic. You now have others in the Caribbean contemplating following your example. Well done on naming Rihanna a national hero. You had Jamaicans wondering if Bob Marley should now be named a hero. Barbados is indeed a trendsetter. Therefore, when Rohan received this invite, he wondered what the most appropriate theme for this talk would be. Therefore, today's session is titled, Putting Students First, Differentiated Instruction and Inclusion in Learning Spaces. At this time, I will turn it over to Rohan for him to provide the session objectives and continue with the presentation. Over to you, Rohan.
Thanks, Janet, for that introduction, I would say, regarding Barbados, a little history. And of course, you can see from this point right on the go, I'm already using technology in my presentation. And when I show people these things, they'll say to me, how did you get started with that? No, I'm using what is called synthetic media to produce that. That's actually a human individual and some algorithms are behind. But we'll talk about that. And if you need to know more, just feel free to ask. Now, this afternoon, and I was about to say this morning, because I'm still just 12:01 or 12:03 my time. You know, as I look around the Caribbean, I must say that we do have a need for special education. Today, we have situations where we have come a far way. Yes, we are more progressive in our approach to supporting students with special needs, but we still need to do a bit more. And I want to say that we cannot negotiate ourselves in providing for these students. What actually has to happen is that we have to make a commitment. The only winners here, when we put students first, must be the students, no other. All right, I'll give students this at the expense of another thing. We cannot go down that line. So as I move forward, I want us to look at the whole context of the Caribbean as it relates to synchronous teaching and asynchronous teaching within the last 2 years. And I want us to define what is differentiated instruction. And finally, I want us to look at emerging technologies as it relates to teaching online and how can be used to support our students. Now, if I ask you to consider today, and I want you to maybe do a little chat in the box, you had an emergency at your school, you're returning next week. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you're returning next week and an incident happened at your school that you're asked to attend to immediately. There's a truck, a car, and a bicycle out there. I want you to select now as an interactive sort of activity, the two tools that you're going to choose or the two modes of transportation that you would automatically go towards now. So please type your responses in the chat. Okay, so I'm presuming that everyone is in this room is just like me. You'd actually choose the bike and the car, but I have news for you today because the bike and the car were taken by the first person who gave their response. So I'm using this in context because I want us to explore that in the past 2 years, we have had to make adjustments. So therefore, in this case, for you to operate that truck, you would of course need to have someone sit down with you, tell you how the operation takes place and allow you to practice. So many of us would struggle with that truck. And if we align what took place in the last 2 years with our education changes in the Caribbean, we would realize that we had to make a drastic shift. and realize that the practices that we had in our online class, in our face-to-face class, when we tried to move them to online, they were just not working out. And many of us frustrated. So I want to use this example because I think it's important for us to understand the global trends that we have had over the past few years. We entered in a situation that many educational institutions were not equipped to address the holistic needs of their vulnerable children. According to OEDC, during the pandemic, students from diverse backgrounds were at risk of not succeeding even more. Many students were affected by various situations in the home. And of course, the lack of support within the learning space created problems. I don't know if Barbados had food insecurity at any point in time, but there was a lack of technology. And the reality is that our concept of schools had changed. We saw schools as being in operation from the face-to-face, and now we were required to do the online learning. And let me tell you this, for one thing, I'm sure that governments across the globe, they tried. But you can try all you want, but if you do not have the system to sustain that learning in that learning space, you'll be working in vain at some point in time. So we have to look further. We have to look at where we want to go. And if we want to look at providing a sort of space for individuals who want to be educated and to have an equal opportunity in reaching their goals, we have to understand the concept of special education. When you first hear the term special education, and I would say that when I first heard that term back in, was it 1996, about there, I thought it was some individuals with just disabilities. But when you look and you explore deeper, it is not that. It encompasses those individuals, but encompasses a wider range of individuals. So when we look at special education, we are practically saying we need an education system or a pathway for supporting students to access the curriculum. So I see special education need as a process where students will be able to be given the provision to access the curriculum. So therefore, if so be it that next week I'm unable to write because I broke my hand, I would be in a special need sort of category because I would need support because that is my dominant hand for manipulating my keyboard and so forth. The aim of special education is to accommodate learning engagement that will provide equal access to students with disabilities and varied learning needs. Many of our Caribbean students do have learning needs. Many situations, rather, it's not catered for. So we have to be, many students in the Caribbean too will struggle to reach their goals. And the reality is that supporting students with special needs will require purposeful planning, monitoring of teaching procedures, and the provision of technology and other resources. And this has to do with online too. And when I talk about access, yes, institutions were navigating towards providing students with their tablets and all digital device. But one thing was missing again was the issue of assistive technology. So students who needed special type of software and hardware to access the curriculum. For example, someone who is blind would have needed to have Braille, and Braille can be done in electronic form now based on where research is taking place. Often students with special needs, I call them also individuals needing accommodations, are provided with an educational plan. So therefore, I want to say that many of the students you're teaching, if they had a special education plan or they had a special provision, when COVID came, the plan was useless because what was in the plan was face-to-face instruction. And moving to the online required us as teachers to make the necessary changes. So I want to go forward to say that as you're moving to your space, whether it be online or face-to-face, I want to say to you, there are some ways in which we can move forward in differentiating work, because differentiation is a process. And someone will say, I work in a differentiated curriculum. I want to say that there's a debate regarding differentiated curriculum because the curriculum, yes, has some levels within it that might be specific based on age appropriate instructions. However, differentiation is done at the classroom level based on what the research is saying. So what is differentiation? It's ensuring access to learning. Therefore, if I'm differentiating and I have someone who is visually impaired and they cannot read the 12 font on that paper or in that electronic document, it means that I'm going to have to update that. It's about inclusive teaching. And if you talk about inclusive teaching and learning, you're talking about what can I do to ensure that this student is able to have access to whatever I'm doing. And when I talk about access, many times in our classroom, we have stated that we have explained the task, whether it be online or face-to-face, and students did not understand. So therefore, before you start your task, define the keywords that will help them to understand the task or the key concept. And this goes on to any age group that you're dealing with, because in the primary, of course, how many students will continue for 1 year and they learn the art of looking at the other friend and getting the answer right? So you have to understand that too. So you want to make sure they understand. A mindset is necessary because with a mindset for inclusion, then you can differentiate. In addition to that, I would say an environment that supports the diversity of the learner. I would say that teachers can do so much. Now, are you following me? Do you have any questions? Let me pause for a moment. Any questions regarding differentiation? Okay, no questions. Okay. I want to look at the process for differentiation now, because it has to be a process. Now, when you're differentiating, you have to understand that the content that you're differentiating, the student must be ready. I cannot say I'm doing quadratic equations and I'm going to differentiate when the child or student has not managed basic addition. So there must be a readiness. So if I can get that student ready to accept the differentiated role, then I can move forward. And when I'm going forward now, I'm saying to myself, you know what, how can I allow that student or gain that student's level of competence and readiness? I have to think about the interest. What the child likes. And then I can incorporate that into my learning or my lesson plan. In order to do both, I think it's important for you to understand the learning profile of the student. The learning profile, and I think all students should have one. If they don't, most countries have, and I'm assuming that Barbados will have. It's just the baseline data for students regarding their learning pathways, how they have managed to move from one transition point to the next, and any necessary information that will aid their learning. So therefore, by using the information, we can say we can go through the process of differentiation. Now, if we step back a bit further and we look, we have done the process now, we have to say, how can I differentiate? And those are some elements that we will look at differentiating. How do we go forward? So I want us to kind of look at another process, right? So this is online. So you're planning your lesson and you say, you know, you're online. You normally, as I stated before, what we knew before in the face-to-face can, to some extent, be implemented online, but we have to make the adjustments. So therefore, when I talk about differentiating instructions in practice, how are you going to develop your content? That's going to be important. Are you going to develop your content in such a way that students can say, all right, you know what, I come in, I learn that concept, and then I move to the next. So you have to differentiate that concept, all right? Can you design your content in such a way that it gives students feedback on what they are learning? So you have to think about the process. Now, when you're thinking about the process, how will they engage in various activities in order for the final product assessment? So when you're thinking about differentiation, you have to think about the content, your teaching practices, and how the product, your assessment, and of course, in that learning environment, you have to ensure that it allows you to engage in these sort of processes. A point was mentioned regarding the need for individual instructions earlier. And I think I'd like to point out too that sometimes in differentiated instruction, individuals tend to think that, okay, it's not one-to-one. Sometimes that individual will need that one-to-one. I'm always concerned with this factor too. You have the gifted and talented in many countries, and they say, all right, that person can work well. You have the person who is way behind the curriculum, and you have that person midpoint. Sometimes that person who is midpoint or average is not given the push. And I think with differentiated instruction, you can use that to push that person even further, and of course, challenge that person. Point taken. You got me thinking a while ago as you did articulate that, you know, and I take a deep breath because I'm thinking, now we have children as young as 5 and 6 logging onto computers, and then I go back and see how they do it in Sweden. That video I remember the years ago, where these individuals do not start the official curriculum until they're 7, and by the time they're 14, they're reading much better than the United States counterpart, and of course, English counterpart, and of course, they're in the top 10 countries as it relates to academic performance. So I am saying to you, we have a system that we need to navigate. So if we can be creative in our support, then we can maximize, make it fun, make the content fun, be creative, and make that cultural relevance. And I like that you have created your own poems and so forth to allow this to take place. Thanks for sharing. Now, I thought about this for quite a long time, and online success within learning spaces for students needing accommodation with special needs. And this is not only tied to students with special needs, but generally it can be used online. Because I think when COVID struck, many individuals were unaware of what should be done. So I know you've been doing this, and I start out by saying we have to restructure our objectives. You know, no longer could we have some of the objectives we have. And of course, the process of assessing had changed. Since lessons were now being taught online in the digital space, educators should have revisited the goals and objectives and redesigned them for the digital space. Therefore, we have to consider how learning will take place. And I want to say this too, because you might say you have done this over a period of time and you have made the adjustments. I want to say this because I'm going to declare it. In another 3 years, what you saw as Zoom and the digital space will change by 100%. It means students are already getting bored of Zoom and that Google Classroom. You're going to have more interactive stuff. So governments across the globe will need to move forward. These goals should be attainable. As you set your goals for your students in the modality, they should be attainable and not overproduce extra work. We have a tendency to justify online by giving more work. And I hope that was not the case for many of our youngsters. Youngsters were saying in Jamaica, can't be bothered with this online again. I saw one video of a child crying, but we have to understand that, listen, it's a transformation and we have to set our goals, manageable goals for them. In setting the goals as you go through, the goals should be done within the time frame of the online class. All right, not because you ran out of time, you're going to say to the student, you know what, you need to allow mommy or daddy to help you with questions 1, 2, and 3, and 5, or wherever you stop. You have to be mindful that, remember, this online learning is new. We don't know how this will challenge future thoughts regarding the pedagogical issues associated with it, and its long process over the last 2 years, but we have to consider these things too. I want to say that as you guide your students through their goals, I would recommend you use a lot of visuals. Students like to see visuals. Step 1, that's what I need to do. Step 2, that's what I need to do. And step 3, that's what I'm going to do to achieve that, especially those students who will need special instruction. Remember, this is a key to. Within the online environment in the next 5 or so years, the teacher will be a part of it, but learning has to be set up in such a way that you will be more of a facilitator, responding to questions and so forth. So you have to set up your content as it relates to having visuals. You must set your goals to engage students. And I want to also say this, that as you set your goals, and I realized teachers tend to talk about their instruction a lot. You give the oral or the narrative regarding what needs to be done. But when students start off, at the end of the time, you have to go back because you say, did they understand what I was saying? Simply means when you give a set of instruction, stop. Ask at least 3 individuals in that online session if they understand the instruction. And these individuals should not be the same all the time, because if they do not understand the instruction when they start off, you will not get the result you're requiring them to have. So always ensure that you take a step back to ask for clarification, especially those students who you think might have a little problem. Now, I want us to move forward because I think when COVID started, many teachers who were struggling to support their students in their online class were somewhat afraid to talk. But I want to say that in any system, and I know it happens in your country too, do not be afraid to consult those who are in charge, those special education persons in your schools and those individuals who understand the possible difficulties students would have. Remember, you have individuals with years of experience, and I'm sure that they can help. So never underestimate the value of collaborating with others. I want to also mention that as you go through the learning landscape for any sort of learning modality, we need to understand there is now a need for a team approach. COVID taught us that the individual approach for learning, where teacher is closed into that classroom with the student, cannot continue. We have to go forward. And because there are more issues that must be addressed within our context today. Now, Vygotsky talked about learning is a social process. Therefore, as educators, do not undervalue, rather, the relationship that you have with your students. Students want to have a sense of belonging. They want to be socially connected to their teacher. And I want to say that when there's a social connection to online learning with your students, there will be academic engagement and success. You may ask, how can we sort of create this environment? And I want to say to you, especially for your younger students, I would send them maybe a message, video message every week with a little graphic or something with a little fun avatar or so forth for them to be motivated, to let them know I'm here. Are you ready for the morning? And I know teachers can do these animated voice where they can sound wonderful, excited, and that sort of thing, especially when you're teaching phonics. You know, you can send them a nice message and of course, allow them to know that you're there. You made mention of this earlier. I just want to put it to focus again, providing additional instruction to students by using various modes. Always post the word of encouragement to students, regardless of the age group. They want to know they're doing a good job. So tell them that you saw their work. They need to do a little bit better here, but overall they did a good job. And that is all taking place online. These are strategies. And if you look at the landscape of education, they talk about teachers having an online persona. An online persona is your online identity that will attract students to you or let them move away from you. So they're talking about your online persona, the way you communicate, the way you engage them. You know, it's your online sort of identity. You can allow students also, regardless if they're not able to write as they want, you can allow them to have a little window that they can just click on a record button using an app and send a message. I do not know what sort of integration you have there, but there's always a possibility. Generally speaking, in order to gain better relationships with your students, you have to be creative with your support. You have to engage them and you have to care, and they know, regardless of how little they are in age, they actually know when. Now, I want to point out to you also the need to have structures and routines. When we talk about structure, I'm saying that students with special needs will need to have a special structure or continue their structure as they did in the face-to-face. When I talk to educators regarding students with special needs in the digital space, the issue of structures and routines become a central part of the discussion. Remember, many students were socially conditioned, and this sort of thing kept them on track. They operated when the bell went, they knew it was lunchtime, it was break time, and the final bell, they jumped up and they danced because it was time to go home. Within the online space, that was eroded. So how do we keep these students on structure? Therefore, in the online space, learning pathways for children need to ensure that it's designed in such a way that it keeps them within a structured sort of appearance, right? But I want to give you a few tips on how you can create structure and routine. First, whatever sort of structure that you create in your online class for your students, it must be age appropriate. That means the task should be age appropriate and the structure should be within the age group. So if you're going to ask students to 5 and 6-year-olds to be sitting on a task for an hour, that's not age appropriate. They'll be sleeping and they'll be doing something else. They'll be looking all around the place instead of looking at what they need to be looking at. So within that structured framework too, I want to say that you have to get them familiar with your pattern. And you have to create visual clues in the online space to guide students. For example, I would say to you, if you want them to type something, you can put a little picture with a keyboard and someone typing. If you want them to listen to something, you can put an ear, a picture, allowing them to listen, showing that it's a listening activity. If you want them to watch something, you can put something of a nice video camera on that screen, and then they will know that these icons are for required activities. And as a matter of fact, these visual clues will also condition them to be alert when they see them. I know change is difficult for children across the globe, especially children with special needs. And as we are looking at individuals, regardless of their learning needs, we have to be patient, flexible, because I want to say this too, because many of the students who were creative, many of the students who were academically inclined at the start of the pandemic now have a special learning need because they have not access to curriculum to the extent, and many of them too will have a learning gap that might extend for a year or so. So how do we deal with it from a country's level and from a classroom level? We'll take some innovative practices in order for many students to catch up. You know, when parents are involved in the child's life as it relates to educational pathways, students will maximize their full potential. Remember, parents know their children the best. Therefore, teachers can use this valuable information to plan for their students. I want to say to you that teachers can engage in conversations with parents that allow them to communicate with parents what they need to do in the home too, because you cannot have structure when the teacher is in the online space, and when the teacher is gone, there's no structure. You know, get parents involved. And I think for us to move into the digital space and to be successful as Caribbean people, we need to have a pathway that will engage parents in learning. I came across a parental learning program back in UK back in 2004. And this program was aimed at getting educators to teach parents so that they could teach their children. And I think we need to look at that in the Caribbean, because right now, parents in the Caribbean need to be a digital savvy or even more for their child. When we think about students in general, we have to think about their sensory needs and their requirements. And when we think about children with special needs, sometimes we might need to modify the sensory sort of information we're giving them. Do not overload them. And I want to say that as many of you planned your lesson, including myself, we might not have taken consideration to the possible overload that we can have in the learning space. I don't know if you ever pick up one of these things and on your mobile device, I have it right here with me, and you see, all right, you know, I want to scroll down and I want to look how to make how to do flying fish, right? Or whatever special dish you have there. By the way, I bought some Morby Bark, which I'm trying to make some drink. So you see, I'm thinking of Barbados as as I was planning for this presentation. But if you're thinking about looking at one of these, the instruction for making Morby drink on your phone, and you type into your phone and you put the word in and it comes up, I want to see the instruction. However, on that page, it has 1,000,001 ads. So I get distracted, and all of a sudden I go to a page, then I realize, guess what? I was here to find out how to make Morby drink. And now I'm on a website on where to get the best cruise. So I'm saying to myself, avoid distractions in the online space. And distractions can be the way you plan. So if you have a page that you're planning content in, and you say, all right, you want a child to focus on this math problem first, you might want to put a video on the next page. If you have a game that will reinforce that concept, you might want to put it below. So when the child is finished from doing what he's doing or she's doing, they go down to that activity. You want to avoid distraction or overload as it relates in that online space. Therefore, I would say to you, if you're addressing students with special needs, check their IEP to ensure that you're giving them the right provision. Accessibility has to do with the formatting of information. So if someone is visually impaired, it should be on the other side. Visually impaired, you ensure that they have the necessary information so they can access the curriculum. For students with special needs, they must have the same education content. This means we will need to consider varied accommodations and address them proactively. I want,
Dr. Jowallah?
yes, please go.
I had my hand up, but I didn't think you noticed, but I just wanted to interject here and say that we have the primary school setting, we have students with learning challenges who are not diagnosed as yet, and some who are diagnosed and have been sent on to other specific classes like our schools that are special needs. So there's a multiplicity of students, and then the ones that are, as we said, a year behind within the school that I am at. So it's not basically only special needs. I know you mentioned special needs specifically because I know you're training that, but our students are the students who have learning challenges, some who are behind because of COVID, and then we have what you call the normal students who may also have other behavioral issues or other things. So we do see the need for special needs, but it's not a special needs organization. I forgot to mention that specifically to you. So just making it clear.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I normally, I understand the context of where you are at this point in time. So if we, and that is why I kind of use the word accommodation, because it covers practically anyone who needs that level of support. So if generally I speak about special needs, I'm also talking about accommodation to ensure that that gap is also closed. So thanks for that clarification. So therefore, if someone is visually impaired, you would of course give that sort of level of support that is necessary. Now, when we talk about accessibility, and I think, thanks for that, Ms. McLean, I think that is important for us to mention. But when we think about accessibility, because I think in that line, I want to bring it back to the normality of those students who might be behind. And when we think about accessibility, we're thinking about those individuals also who might need to have their preferred learning preferences deployed in the classroom. So if you're thinking about accessibility for any individual, you're thinking about accessibility as it relates to making that content into the sort of mode that they will grasp. Some people are visual. I would listen to a recording and I'll remember most of it. Some people are going to say, all right, you know what, I want to draw a picture. So you're thinking about how you're going to assess and accommodate learning differences. And once we do that, we should be able to move forward. The presentation of material will be important in any online class, whether it be a special need or in the normal classroom setting. And therefore, I recommend to you also that you take the time to break down your material in such a way that you break it down in chunks. That goes for every learner. As a matter of fact, in higher education, everyone is talking about breaking down the content in such a way that it's easy for them to just digest. Once again, do not overload the learner. We tend to give a lot of work in the online space, and hence we have the problem that we're having. When I talk about orientation, I think it goes for everyone sitting or standing. I'm standing. In the example of the truck, the car, and the bicycle, we realize that many times there needs to be some level of orientation. In the case of the truck, all of you, including myself, would need one-to-one instruction to have access. So therefore, if we needed that, we would have access so we could learn to operate that truck. For students in general, it is essential that we allow them to orientate themselves to the learning space. This could be a normal person with a normal child who is gifted and talented, to the extent where the child needs special accommodation or guidance regarding that. I personally have engaged in courses in the Caribbean, taught in the Caribbean, where I've seen adults not able to enter that online space because they did not know how to enter. So they were out of that online space. So therefore, students, regardless, if you're going to teach them in a learning space, you have to ensure that they are able to navigate these spaces correctly. All right. So when we're thinking about the learner, regardless of where they are, orientation is a must, because just as you saw with the truck, you could not drive that truck because you are not orientated to use the equipment, just as it is within online learning space that needs to be accommodated. But we need to advocate for our students because I think it's important, and advocacy starts with the classroom teacher. And of course, that is a must. When you advocate for students, you see someone who's not working to the level that they should be working at, you're advocating for them as a teacher, but parents and other organizations also have a role to play. Remember, someone earlier said there was a passion for reading, and I went on a nice conversation because I thought when I look at the landscape, reading skills are not being put to the highlight within our critical discourses in our society. If we look further down, when you look for reading jobs, you'll find that they do not exist. It is something else. So I'm saying to myself, we have to prioritize and we have to be advocates for what we need to do in order for us to move forward. Many of you indicated earlier that you are teachers of reading. And I think Microsoft has a wonderful tool called Immersive Reader that can help individuals who are somewhat slow, help with their as it relates to reading behind, can help them to read at pace, and it has a color coded, especially for students with dyslexia. Now, when we move forward, I think we can use many other tools, but I thought Google has this sort of voice to text that you can implement even for little ones that they can use if they wanted to talk and have that sort of conversation recorded. For the little ones, I don't recommend, based on the age, they might want to do a collaboration document or collaborative document that can be done. But I think as you reach up to maybe 10, 11, that's the age appropriate for that use. I think Alexa application is wonderful. Alexa, could you tell me the weather in Barbados, please?
Currently, in Bridgetown, Barbados, it's 83 degrees Fahrenheit with cloudy skies. Today, you can expect showers with a high of 84 degrees and a low of 75 degrees.
Alexa, who is the Prime Minister of Barbados?
The current Prime Minister of Barbados is Mia Mottley.
Okay, and I think that might have changed, not yet updated. All right, so I'm just showing you the use of technology that you can use over a period of time. And of course, I like Alexa because it provides educators and parents with a platform that they can use their voice to interact with technology, deepen their learning, and provide access to information. You know, so you can ask, a little 5-year-old could speak to Alexa and Alexa would respond. With Alexa, I think teachers can also use it to prepare for upcoming lessons. Just imagine You have a class of 6-year-olds and you're doing a lesson and you have an Alexa app right there on your system that students can interact with. They wanted to find out a little information, they can. I like also using YouTube videos, and I know the Caribbean has used WhatsApp, but I think this is a wonderful tool that I came across some time ago. And I just wanted to tell you, you could use this. This is called ThingLink, and you could use this to interact with practically your students if you wanted to tell them a story, be creative. And for this one, this was designed for a class that I was teaching, and I was teaching the triangular slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. So I started here. So I gave a storyline here, a timeline, and gave some information regarding the slave trade, and that's a video. I could play the video. All right. And then I have pictures here that I could show, talks about the transatlantic slave trade. And that's not a video here that you could go through. So it opens a lot of process. Here's another picture showing the slave trade, how they were transported across from one area to next in Africa. And of course, this was the Middle Passage, another historical event.
The thing that distinguishes slavery in Africa from Atlantic slavery is...
All right, so it goes through, and of course, it tells a lot of storyline of what's happening. That can be modified to a play area, that can be modified to a storytelling area, that could be modified to reading area. So you could have pop up with a text saying, pronounce these words and move to another phase. It's creative, very, very, very flexible in nature if you wanted to use this sort of technology. And it can be used right across platforms just to engage students. I want to say to you, the future of education is looking bright. And as I said to you earlier, when you come back on into face-to-face, I'm going to make this declaration again. It will never be only face-to-face, because right now we need to transform our learning modality in such a way that it's going to be of a blended nature. I started off with my virtual presenter. You could put that presenter on a web page, and you could allow that presenter to give tasks. And then you could move to another presenter. And of course, the classroom teacher would be part of that. I want to talk about AI, because I think AI is going to be a pathway for not only special education, but pathway for all students. Students who are gifted and talented will be on a journey as they create their own learning pathways. I like artificial intelligence in education because it's going to open potential to promote inclusion of students, all students, and allow feedback to the teacher, of course, in real time. I want to say that I know that Barbados is working on some robotic stuff coming along, and I think that is the way forward. If we can get classroom students to start think very early at coding, age 5 and 6, we're going to set the pathway for greater success in our society, because these same students can lead the way in providing that unique education experience necessary. But for this to take place, I've given you a lot of things to think about. For us to enhance our pathways, for us to enhance our learning pathways, we have to really consider putting in a lot. As I stated before, there's going to be a kind of revolution as it relates to teaching and learning. Many of you, I know you're in the thinking about technology, and it's moving very fast. But let us think about the metaverse. Facebook in another 2 years might become a learning platform. Who knows? Because they are coming with the metaverse, and so will other people have that sort of technology. What will the metaverse be? The metaverse will allow you to enter that learning space. Your students will log on wherever you are. All those with learning needs and those who are gifted and talented will be given a tailored sort of education that would push them further to maximize their full potential. I am worried about it, yes, because there are some ethical issues Notwithstanding, we should not say we're not going to engage in them because it's already here. And by 2025 or 26, we will be in the metaverse indirectly or some other form. I'm telling you, it's coming. So I want to close using some final thoughts that I have. Us to really maximize students' potential, and I use the word potential because I think one of the big debates to design an inclusive pathway for learning as it relates to education, there must be greater investments. When I talk about greater investments, I'm talking about having teachers trained to the capacity that they can deliver a curriculum in any modality. We need to be advocates for inclusion as it relates to learning spaces. I'm really concerned regarding digital accessibility as it relates to individuals being left behind because of the digital divide. The digital divide has always been around. It's just that we've just been using this term. Because if you look where I'm from, once there was no television. Yes, when we got a television, it was black and white, while others had color. And yes, it was a television that I had to stand up to turn the dial, while others had a remote television. So there was always a digital divide in any situation. But for us to maximize our goals and to achieve, we must have partnerships with external sector, international bodies, enhance teacher training, and for us to deliver an inclusive curriculum that helps everyone have access to that curriculum, there must be assistive technology. And my final point as I wrap up, you can do all you can. However, if we do not coordinate the services to help our students in the online setting and whatever, we will not reach our full potential. So as you plan to go in to the face-to-face, I would say to you, think about some of the thoughts I've had with you today. Consider what transitioning back will be for them. You know, again, the routine and structure will have to change. My question to you, are you as teachers ready to transition in? And what have you learned from your online that you intend to take place or to take back into the face-to-face setting? Thanks again for this opportunity to share with the group.